You will not believe what your soulmate's son did half an hour ago. He shamelessly destroyed my beloved child. Half an hour ago, your soulmate's son did something so sudden, so shamelessly bold, that everyone in that house went completely silent. Your soulmate didn't yell. They didn't move. They simply stared at what had been destroyed, almost unable to believe their own eyes. Because this wasn't an accident. The boy knew exactly what he was doing. And the strangest part? Moments before it happened, he had discovered something connected directly to you. Something he apparently was never supposed to see. He found it hidden among your soulmate's personal belongings, and whatever he saw changed his expression instantly. At first, he asked one simple question. Your soulmate refused to answer. Then he asked again, this time with emotion trembling beneath his voice. What could he possibly have discovered that made him react this way? Don't skip, because what he destroyed was only the beginning. Your soulmate tried to take the object away from him, but the boy stepped back and demanded the truth. There had been whispers inside that family for some time. Certain people had apparently told him a very different story about you, making him believe that you were somehow responsible for the tension surrounding your soulmate. But what he discovered half an hour ago contradicted everything he had been told. Suddenly, he realized someone may have deliberately kept important information from him. His frustration exploded. He walked straight toward something your soulmate had carefully preserved for months, something tied to the separation, the misunderstandings, and the pressure that had kept your soulmate from making a decision. Then, without asking permission, he grabbed it. Your soulmate called his name sharply. Too late. In one furious motion, he destroyed it. But here is what nobody expected. Your soulmate didn't seem angry about losing it. Instead, their eyes filled with tears. Because the thing he destroyed was not a precious memory of you. It was something that had been standing between you and your soulmate. Something your soulmate had been afraid to confront. And when their son realized what it represented, he apparently decided he wanted it gone. Yet seconds later, he said something even more startling. He looked directly at your soulmate and asked, if this is the reason you're miserable, why are you still protecting it? That question landed harder than anything he had broken. Your soulmate sat down, speechless, because their son had just exposed a truth they had been avoiding for far too long. But then the boy revealed why he had searched through those belongings in the first place. Someone had contacted him earlier and warned him about you. He wanted proof before believing them. Instead, he found evidence pointing in the opposite direction, and what he discovered about the person who gave him that warning is about to change this entire situation. What happened seconds after that question completely changed the atmosphere in the room. Your soulmate's son pulled out his phone and showed your soulmate the message that had pushed him to start searching in the first place. The person behind it had warned him that you were somehow trying to interfere with his family, and they wanted him to believe your return would create nothing but trouble. But there was one problem. While looking for evidence against you, he found something your soulmate had kept hidden, something proving that the story he had been given was incomplete. He began connecting details that nobody expected him to notice. Dates didn't match. Certain claims contradicted what he had personally witnessed. And suddenly, destroying that object wasn't simply an angry outburst. It was his way of rejecting a story he no longer believed. But one question remained: why had someone been so determined to turn him against you? Your soulmate looked at the phone and immediately recognized something about the message. Not the words. The timing. That detail made their face change because the warning had arrived shortly after a private conversation that very few people knew had taken place. How could this person have known? Your soulmate's son noticed the reaction and pressed harder. He wanted names. He wanted to know why people were discussing you behind closed doors, and most importantly, why nobody had ever allowed him to hear the full truth. Your soulmate tried to calm him, but he refused to let the subject disappear again. Were they lying to me about this person? He finally asked. Your soulmate hesitated, and that hesitation answered more than words ever could. Stay with this, because the boy then admitted something your soulmate never expected. This wasn't the first strange message he had received about you. For days, someone had been quietly feeding him pieces of information designed to make you look like the problem. He had kept those messages secret because he wanted to understand what was happening before confronting anyone. But tonight, curiosity became suspicion, and suspicion led him straight to what he destroyed. Your soulmate suddenly understood that their son had been pulled into a conflict he never should have been involved in. Yet instead of blaming you, the boy had started questioning the people closest to him. Then he opened another message. This one was different. It contained a detail about your soulmate's private feelings that should have been impossible for an outsider to know. Your soulmate read it twice, then looked toward the doorway as if one terrible possibility had just entered their mind. Their son noticed and quietly asked, "You know who sent these, don't you?" Your soulmate didn't answer, but someone standing just outside the room suddenly did. The voice from the doorway belonged to someone your soulmate's son never expected to be involved. They had apparently been listening long enough to realize the secret could no longer stay hidden. Your soulmate immediately stood up, but their son stepped forward first, still holding the phone with those messages glowing on the screen. He asked one devastating question: why were you trying to make me hate someone I barely even know? Silence followed. The person at the doorway tried to explain that they had only been protecting the family, but the boy wasn't convinced anymore. He pointed toward the pieces of what he had just destroyed and demanded to know why everyone seemed terrified of your soulmate making their own choice about you. That was when your soulmate finally spoke, and what they admitted made their son lower the phone in disbelief. Your soulmate confessed that the destroyed object represented an agreement they had been pressured to respect. It wasn't something legally binding or dangerous. It was a personal promise made during an emotionally difficult period, when family pressure and fear had become stronger than their own voice. Your soulmate had agreed to keep distance from you because they were repeatedly told that reconnecting would create problems for everyone around them. Their son suddenly understood why your soulmate had seemed different lately. The quietness. The distracted expression. Those moments when they stared at their phone and then put it away without sending anything. But he also realized something else. The person at the doorway had known about that promise all along. So why were they secretly messaging him now? Why involve him unless they were afraid your soulmate was already preparing to break that promise? Then came the detail that changed his anger into determination. Your soulmate admitted they had recently considered contacting you again. Nobody was supposed to know. They hadn't announced it, and they hadn't even decided exactly what they would say. Yet somehow, the person sending those messages had discovered enough to panic. Your soulmate's son looked down at the broken pieces scattered across the floor and suddenly understood what he had actually destroyed, the physical reminder of a promise that had kept your soulmate emotionally trapped. He didn't apologize. Instead, he looked at your soulmate and said quietly, "Then stop letting everybody else decide who you're allowed to care about." But before your soulmate could respond, the person in the doorway revealed why they had been so desperate to prevent contact with you, and it had nothing to do with protecting the family. The confession came out slowly, almost reluctantly, because the person in the doorway knew there was no believable excuse left. They admitted they had been afraid of what would happen if your soulmate spoke to you directly. Not because you would damage the family, but because one honest conversation could expose how much interference had taken place behind the scenes. Certain messages had never reached your soulmate. Certain things your soulmate supposedly said about you had been exaggerated, twisted, or repeated without context. Their son stared at the person as if he were seeing them differently for the first time. Then he asked the question nobody wanted to answer, "So how much of what I believed about them was actually true?" Your soulmate looked down, and the silence became unbearable. That was when their son did something even more unexpected. He began opening the old messages on his phone one by one, comparing them with what he had discovered among your soulmate's belongings. The contradictions were impossible to ignore. One message claimed your soulmate wanted nothing more to do with you, yet he had found a private note written during that same period, one your soulmate never sent. It revealed regret, confusion, and a desire to explain what had really happened. Suddenly, the boy understood why your soulmate had kept it. They hadn't forgotten you. They had been fighting themselves every day, caught between what they genuinely felt and what other people expected them to do. But there was one sentence in that unsent note that made him stop reading completely. Your soulmate immediately reached for the paper, but their son had already seen enough. His expression softened, and for the first time that night, the anger disappeared from his face. He looked at your soulmate and asked, "You were actually going to find them, weren't you?" Your soulmate couldn't deny it anymore. The destroyed promise, the secret messages, and the hidden note were all pointing toward the same truth. Your soulmate had already been preparing to make a decision about you before tonight's chaos began. Something huge is waiting for you, because their son didn't simply accept that revelation. He picked up your soulmate's phone, placed it directly into their hand, and challenged them to prove that everyone else's interference had finally lost its power. But just as your soulmate unlocked the screen, another message appeared, and the name attached to it made everyone in that room freeze. That name changed everything because it belonged to someone your soulmate had trusted throughout the entire separation. Someone who had repeatedly presented themselves as neutral, supportive, and concerned only with keeping peace. Yet the new message contained a warning that sounded almost identical to the one sent secretly to their son. Your soulmate read it once, then again, while their son watched every change in their expression. The message urged your soulmate not to contact you tonight and insisted that doing so would undo everything we worked for. Those words exposed something nobody could explain away. "We worked for," the boy repeated. Suddenly, this wasn't one person interfering out of concern. It sounded coordinated. And your soulmate finally began wondering how many decisions they believed were their own had actually been shaped by other people. Their son reached for the broken pieces on the floor and found something tucked inside what he had destroyed, a folded page your soulmate had apparently forgotten was there. He opened it carefully, expecting another old note, but what he found made him look directly at the person still standing near the doorway. It contained several dates and short handwritten reminders from months earlier. Beside one date were the words, "I was ready to call." Beside another, "They convinced me to wait." And beside the most recent date was something far more revealing, "No more waiting after this week." Your soulmate had already made a private decision. They were planning to stop allowing fear and family pressure to control what happened between you. Their son hadn't destroyed that decision. Without realizing it, he had destroyed the very thing your soulmate associated with continuing to delay it. But then he noticed one final line at the bottom of the page, written more recently than everything else. Your soulmate tried to take the paper back, yet their son quietly read it aloud, "If I hear the truth from them directly, I'll know what I have to do." The room became completely still. Your soulmate wasn't preparing to blindly run toward you. They wanted one honest conversation without relatives, rumors, warnings, or anyone speaking on your behalf. Their son handed the page back and said, "Then talk to them yourself." Your soulmate looked at the phone again, and this time their finger moved toward your contact. But before they could press it, their son suddenly remembered something from one of those anonymous messages, a tiny detail everyone had overlooked. He reopened the conversation, scrolled upward, and when he showed your soulmate what he had found, they realized the person manipulating this situation might be much closer than anyone had suspected. The overlooked detail was only a few words, but your soulmate recognized them immediately. It was a private phrase used during an argument inside that house weeks earlier, an argument their son had never witnessed and you could not possibly have known about. Only a handful of people had been present. Suddenly, the circle became very small. Their son compared the anonymous warning with another message from the trusted person whose name had just appeared, and the wording was almost identical. Same unusual expression. Same punctuation. Even the same habit of breaking sentences in a particular place. Your soulmate's face changed as the possibility became impossible to ignore. Someone they had trusted had apparently been influencing both sides of the situation while pretending to offer advice. But why? What could they possibly gain by keeping your soulmate away from you? Their son refused to remain quiet. He turned toward the person near the doorway and asked whether they had known about these messages. The response came too quickly, "I had nothing to do with that." But nobody had accused them directly. That immediate denial made the boy suspicious. Your soulmate noticed it too. Then another piece clicked into place. Months earlier, every time your soulmate considered reaching out to you, some new rumor, warning, or emotional complication appeared almost immediately. They had believed it was coincidence. Now the timing looked very different. Their son stared at the remains of the object he had destroyed and finally understood why people had wanted that old promise preserved. As long as your soulmate believed contacting you would hurt everyone around them, nobody had to risk you and your soulmate comparing what each of you had actually been told. Then the boy made a decision nobody in the room could stop. Instead of arguing, he asked your soulmate to call the trusted person whose message had just appeared, but not mention the anonymous warnings. Your soulmate hesitated, then pressed the call button and put the phone on speaker. After only 2 rings, the person answered. Your soulmate calmly said they were thinking about contacting you tonight. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a nervous question. Did he show you those messages? Nobody moved. Your soulmate had never mentioned their son. Never mentioned his phone. Never mentioned any messages at all. Their son slowly looked toward the doorway, realizing they had just received the first undeniable clue. But before your soulmate could ask how the caller knew, the voice on the other end said something even more revealing. Please don't let him tell you what he found inside that thing. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The caller had just revealed knowledge they should never have possessed. Your soulmate's son slowly looked down at the shattered object, then at the folded page he had pulled from inside it. How did you know there was something in there? He asked. The caller tried to recover, claiming your soulmate had mentioned it months ago, but your soulmate immediately shook their head. They had never told anyone about hiding that page. That secret belonged to them alone. Now the entire situation looked different. Someone hadn't merely been giving unwanted advice from the outside. They had apparently known details about your soulmate's private belongings, private decisions, and private feelings. Your soulmate ended the call without another word. But their son wasn't finished. He suddenly remembered seeing that trusted person near the same cabinet days earlier, supposedly searching for something completely unrelated. That memory forced your soulmate to confront another possibility. What if the hidden note had already been seen? What if the interference intensified because someone discovered that your soulmate was preparing to contact you? Their son reopened the anonymous messages and checked the dates carefully. The first warning arrived the morning after that person had visited the house. The second appeared after your soulmate privately wrote, "No more waiting after this week." The timing was too precise to dismiss. Your soulmate's expression shifted from confusion to quiet disappointment. For months, they had questioned their own instincts. They had wondered whether staying away from you was truly the responsible choice. Now they were realizing that some of their fear may have been deliberately reinforced. And their son, the very person someone had tried to turn against you, had become the one exposing the pattern. Then he picked up the largest broken piece from the floor and noticed something neither of them had seen before. A thin envelope had been wedged beneath the inner lining, almost completely hidden. Your soulmate stared at it in disbelief because they had never placed an envelope there. Their son carefully pulled it free. There was no name on the outside, only a date written across the corner, a date your soulmate recognized instantly. It was the exact day everything between you and your soulmate had begun falling apart. Inside was a printed copy of a message supposedly connected to you, the very message that had influenced one of your soulmate's biggest decisions. But their son noticed something strange about it immediately. One line looked different from the rest, as though part of the original message had been altered before it was printed. And when your soulmate read the missing context written faintly on the back, they finally understood what someone had desperately wanted them never to discover. The faint writing on the back transformed the meaning of that old message completely. Your soulmate had spent months believing you had deliberately chosen distance, but the missing context suggested something very different. You had been asking for clarity before making any decision. One crucial sentence had been removed from the printed version, leaving behind words that sounded colder than the original meaning. Their son compared the page with the dates on the hidden note and immediately saw the connection. The day your soulmate received that altered version was the same day they abandoned their first attempt to reach you. Suddenly, the destroyed object on the floor represented far more than a painful promise. It had been hiding the clue that could explain why your soulmate had misunderstood you in the first place. And one uncomfortable question now filled the room: who had placed that envelope there? Your soulmate's son turned the envelope over and noticed a tiny handwritten mark near the seal. He had seen that mark before. It was the same shorthand symbol the trusted person often used when labeling papers and reminders. Your soulmate didn't want to jump to conclusions, but their son began remembering small details that suddenly mattered: the unexplained visit to the cabinet, the anonymous warnings, the caller knowing about the hidden contents, and now this familiar mark. Each clue pointed in the same direction. Yet instead of becoming furious, your soulmate became unusually calm. They realized accusations would accomplish nothing without hearing the truth directly. Their son agreed, but he made one request: this time, nobody would be allowed to speak for you. No relatives. No trusted advisors. No carefully repeated stories. If your soulmate wanted answers, they had to come directly from the person at the center of all this, you. Your soulmate picked up the phone again, but their son stopped them for just 1 second. He reached into his pocket and produced something he had taken from the shattered object before anyone noticed. It was a small photograph folded behind the inner lining, and your soulmate's reaction revealed immediately that it mattered. The photograph showed you from an earlier moment your soulmate had never truly forgotten. On the back, in your soulmate's own handwriting, were words they had apparently written during the hardest period of separation: ask them before believing anyone else. Their son looked at those words, then quietly placed the photograph beside the phone. You already knew what you needed to do, he said. Your soulmate stared at your contact, finally ready to act, but before the call could begin, their son revealed one last thing he had found with that photograph. A second name, written underneath yours, belonging to the person who may have started this entire misunderstanding. That second name made your soulmate's hand freeze above the phone. It belonged to someone who had been present near the beginning of the misunderstanding, someone everyone had treated as merely a messenger between two sides. Your soulmate remembered exactly what this person had said back then. That you wanted distance, that you had already made up your mind, and that reaching out would only make matters worse. But now their son asked a question that should have been asked months ago. Did you ever hear those words directly from them? Your soulmate slowly shook their head. Almost everything had passed through someone else. That realization was painful because the entire separation suddenly rested on information neither side may have personally confirmed. And the boy who had supposedly acted recklessly half an hour ago was now uncovering the very details everyone else had ignored. Their son immediately searched through the older messages again. This time, he wasn't looking at what they said. He was looking at when they arrived. A pattern emerged. Whenever your soulmate considered approaching you, the second person's name appeared somewhere nearby. A phone call, a forwarded message, a warning, or an unexpected piece of information that encouraged another delay. Then the boy found something even stranger. One old screenshot supposedly showing something you had written carried a timestamp that didn't match the date your soulmate had been told it was sent. "Why would someone change the timing?" he asked. Your soulmate couldn't answer. But the person standing near the doorway suddenly looked away, and their son caught it. He walked closer and asked quietly, "You knew about this too, didn't you?" This time, there was no immediate denial. The truth finally began slipping through the cracks. The person admitted that there had been conversations about keeping your soulmate from making an emotional decision, but insisted they never intended for things to go this far. Your soulmate asked who had started those conversations. Silence. Their son asked again. Still nothing. Then he placed the altered message, the envelope, and the hidden photograph together on the table. All of this happened because nobody wanted these two people talking directly, he said. That sentence changed your soulmate's expression completely. They picked up the phone again, no longer asking anyone for permission. But their son suddenly reached across the table and stopped them, not because he wanted to prevent the call. He had just noticed a notification appearing on his own phone from the mysterious sender, and this time the message contained no warning about you. It contained an urgent request aimed directly at him: destroy the rest before they see what's underneath. Those 6 words sent your soulmate's son straight back toward the shattered remains on the floor. The rest could mean only one thing: there was something else hidden inside what he had destroyed. Your soulmate knelt beside him as they carefully separated the torn lining from the broken frame, searching every corner they had overlooked. Then his fingers touched a narrow compartment beneath the base. Inside were several folded pages secured together, and the first page carried your soulmate's name beside a date from months earlier. But these weren't love letters or sentimental memories. They were notes documenting conversations. Who had called, what had supposedly been said about you, and which decisions your soulmate made afterward. Someone had been keeping track. And beside several entries was the same second name they had just discovered beneath yours. The most disturbing detail wasn't what the notes contained. It was what they proved about the timing. Every major misunderstanding had been followed by somebody stepping in before your soulmate could speak with you directly. Their son traced the pattern with his finger until he reached one entry that had been crossed out heavily. Beneath the ink, a few words were still visible: they almost spoke tonight. Your soulmate remembered that night immediately. They had held their phone for nearly an hour, preparing to contact you, until someone called with information that changed their mind. Now the notes suggested that interruption hadn't been accidental. Their son looked toward the doorway and asked, "Who wrote these?" The person standing there finally admitted recognizing the handwriting, but before giving the name, they said something even more important: the person responsible had believed they were protecting your soulmate from a truth they weren't ready to hear. That explanation didn't satisfy the boy. Protecting them from what? He demanded. The answer came quietly. Apparently, the person behind the interference had learned something about the original separation that would force your soulmate to reconsider almost everything they believed about you. They feared that if you and your soulmate compared your memories directly, an old deception would unravel immediately. Your soulmate stopped listening to excuses. They picked up the phone and said there would be no more intermediaries. No more altered screenshots. No more anonymous warnings. Their son stepped beside them, almost daring anyone to interfere again. Then, just before your soulmate pressed your contact, he unfolded the final page from the hidden compartment. Unlike the others, this one contained a short handwritten confession. He read the first sentence silently, looked up in disbelief, and whispered, "This says the person who separated you never expected you two to stay apart this long." The confession continued with words that made your soulmate forget about the phone for a moment. According to the page, the original interference had been intended to create temporary distance, just long enough for emotions to cool and outside pressure to settle. But when your soulmate accepted the first misleading story without contacting you directly, someone realized how easily the distance could be extended. One misunderstanding became another. One delayed conversation became months of silence. And eventually, telling the truth became more frightening than continuing the deception. Your soulmate's son read the page carefully, then asked the question burning through everything they had discovered, "So all this time, both of you could have been waiting because each thought the other had chosen to walk away?" Nobody could answer him with certainty. That uncertainty was exactly why the next conversation suddenly mattered more than every rumor combined. Then your soulmate noticed something written beneath the confession in smaller handwriting. It referenced a message you had supposedly never received. Months earlier, your soulmate had apparently tried to send you an explanation through the same person whose name kept appearing in these hidden papers. Your soulmate remembered writing it. They remembered rewriting it several times because they wanted every word to be right. Yet they had been told afterward that you saw the message and chose not to respond. Their son immediately asked for proof that it had ever reached you. There was none. No delivery confirmation. No direct reply. Nothing except another person's word. That realization hit your soulmate differently from everything else. What if your silence had never been rejection? What if you had never even known that your soulmate was trying to explain? Their son placed the confession on the table and pushed the phone back toward your soulmate. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. Stop asking them what happened. Ask the person who actually lived it with you. Your soulmate unlocked the screen and opened your contact again. But before pressing call, they noticed something that had been hidden by months of emotional confusion. An old draft still saved on the phone. It was the original message they had written for you before trusting someone else to deliver a different version. Your soulmate opened it, and their son saw their eyes immediately fill with emotion. The first lines made one thing unmistakable: your soulmate had never intended to disappear from your life without explanation. But near the bottom was a sentence even their son hadn't expected, because it revealed exactly what your soulmate had been prepared to ask you if that message had ever reached you. That sentence was simple, but it carried months of unfinished emotion. "If there is still something real between us, will you meet me and let me hear the truth from you?" Your soulmate stared at those words as if they belonged to another lifetime. Their son immediately understood what made them so important. This wasn't a goodbye message. It wasn't rejection. Your soulmate had been asking for a conversation, and somewhere between writing those words and believing they had reached you, the meaning had been lost. "Did you ever send this exact version?" he asked. Your soulmate shook their head. They had trusted someone else to pass along the important part because tensions were high and direct contact felt impossible at the time. Their son leaned back in disbelief. The very people who insisted they were preventing confusion may have created the biggest misunderstanding of all. But there was another detail inside the draft that nobody had noticed. Near the bottom, your soulmate had referenced a specific place connected to a meaningful memory between you. They had apparently suggested meeting there if you were willing to talk. Their son compared the detail with the hidden notes from the destroyed object and found an entry written on the same date. Change of plan. Do not let meeting happen. Your soulmate read those words 3 times. Now the interference wasn't merely implied. Someone had apparently known about the possibility of that meeting and wanted it stopped. The person near the doorway finally admitted hearing discussions about it, but claimed they never knew the full reason. Your soulmate asked who had ordered everyone to interfere. The answer came with visible hesitation. It was the same person whose name had been written beneath yours on the photograph. Your soulmate finally pressed the call button, but their son raised one finger before the first ring. Another message had arrived on his phone. The mysterious sender was no longer pretending to warn him about you. This time, the tone had changed completely. You don't understand what you're uncovering. Ask them what happened the night before everything changed. Their son read it aloud. Your soulmate immediately went pale. There had been something that night they had never told him, something they believed had nothing to do with you at the time. A private conversation. A promise made by someone close to them. And one specific statement that convinced your soulmate you were preparing to leave their life. Their son looked at the hidden confession, then back at your soulmate and asked, "Who told you that?" Your soulmate whispered the name. And it was not the person anyone in that room had been suspecting. The name your soulmate whispered belonged to someone who had barely appeared in any of the messages they had uncovered. That was exactly what made it so unsettling. This person had stayed quietly outside the conflict while everyone else carried the blame, yet they were the one who had spoken privately with your soulmate the night before everything changed. Your soulmate remembered the conversation clearly now. They had been told that you were preparing to close the door permanently and that contacting you would only embarrass both of you. There had been no screenshot. No recording. No direct proof. Just the word of someone your soulmate trusted completely. Their son stared at them and asked, "And that was enough to make you stop?" Your soulmate answered softly, at that moment, "Yes." But now one frightening possibility remained. What if that conversation had been the first move in everything that followed? Their son immediately returned to the hidden papers and searched for the newly revealed name. At first, nothing appeared. Then he noticed initials beside the earliest entry, initials matching that person perfectly. Suddenly, the timeline made sense. The first private warning came from them. The altered message appeared afterward. Then came the pressure, the promise to maintain distance, the intercepted communication, and finally the anonymous messages designed to keep the son suspicious of you. But why would one person create such an elaborate chain of misunderstandings? The person near the doorway finally revealed something they had been afraid to say. Long before the separation, the newly named person had openly worried that your soulmate's connection with you would change the family dynamic. They feared losing influence. They feared your soulmate would begin making major choices independently. And apparently, they believed creating temporary distance between you would restore the control they felt slipping away. Then your soulmate's son noticed one last connection. The mysterious messages arriving on his phone used information only someone inside the family circle could know, but the sender had made one mistake. They referenced a childhood nickname for him that almost nobody used anymore. He froze. Your soulmate recognized the nickname too. Suddenly, the anonymous sender wasn't anonymous at all. Their son typed a short response, "I know who you are." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, a message arrived, "Please don't tell your parent until I explain." The boy slowly turned the screen toward your soulmate. There was no more guessing now. But instead of responding, he pressed the call icon himself, and when the person answered, the first words they spoke revealed that destroying that object half an hour ago had interrupted something they had planned for tonight. The voice on the phone sounded frightened, not angry. Before your soulmate's son could ask a single question, the person blurted out, "You weren't supposed to find those papers tonight." That admission silenced everyone. The boy immediately asked what was supposed to happen instead. After several seconds, the caller confessed they had planned to remove the hidden papers before your soulmate could reconsider contacting you. They knew your soulmate had been getting closer to breaking the old promise, and they feared that once you two finally compared what each had been told, months of interference would become obvious. But they hadn't expected the son to lose patience, grab the object, and shamelessly tear it apart in front of everyone. His impulsive act had exposed the compartment before anyone could quietly empty it. Yet one question remained unanswered: why was keeping you apart still so important after all this time? The caller finally admitted that the original plan had grown beyond anyone's control. What began as an attempt to delay your soulmate's decision had turned into a web of half-truths that several people eventually helped maintain. Each person knew only part of what had happened, which made the deception easier to hide. The caller feared that if your soulmate contacted you now, you would mention something from the past that would expose the very first lie. Their son demanded to know exactly what that lie was. The answer came reluctantly. Your soulmate had been told you rejected an opportunity to meet and explain yourself. But according to the caller, you had never rejected it. The invitation had never been delivered to you at all. Your soulmate closed their eyes, remembering how deeply that supposed rejection had affected them. One missing invitation had changed everything that followed. Their son looked at the shattered pieces again, but now there was no regret in his expression. If he hadn't destroyed that object, the hidden evidence might have disappeared tonight, and your soulmate could have continued believing a story built on something you never actually did. Then the caller said something unexpected: "There's another copy." Your soulmate immediately asked where it was. Silence returned. The person tried to avoid answering, but the boy refused to let them escape. Finally, they revealed that the original version of the undelivered invitation and a response someone had prepared in your name had been kept somewhere your soulmate would never think to search. Their son demanded the location. When the caller finally gave it, your soulmate stared toward the other side of the room in disbelief, because the evidence had apparently been inside their own home all along. Your soulmate moved toward the place the caller had described while their son stayed close behind, still holding the phone on speaker. It was an old storage box tucked behind documents nobody had touched in months. Your soulmate opened it and found a plain envelope beneath a stack of forgotten papers. Inside was the original invitation, the one you were supposedly given and supposedly rejected. But there was no evidence.